now we want to talk about digital signage in enterprise and offices. And I'm glad Mark is here, and some of you may know Mark already from our last conference. And Mark, this is yours, and the stage is yours. And you did some really cool research with Google, right?
Yeah, that's absolutely
And you want to share some of that. So please go ahead. Good.
Oh, wow, it's got that. Excuse me. Cool. Good afternoon, everybody, and thank you very much for having me on stage. Today, I'm going to talk about employee-facing digital signage, the good, the bad, and the ugly of screens that communicate. So to begin with, just a little bit about Screencloud. We're an emerging leader in the cloud software digital signage space. We have 5 hubs around the world, over 100 employees, 10,000 customers. And at the enterprise level, we tend to focus on employee-facing screens, so screens that communicate. And here's a few logos of some of the companies we collaborate with. So when it comes to screens that sell, things are going pretty well. I think that was my clever little thing this morning. We are generally doing quite well in outdoor advertising, in retail, in QSR. We're seeing widespread adoption. The content looks good, and it seems to be making quite a big impact. But when it comes to the workplace, well, screens exist here too. It's just that they're often blank and barely being used. Or they're showing an old PowerPoint, looping around images and videos. In some cases, they've just turned it to cable news, put that on mute, and of course, that's even if it's working at all. Additionally, we have a huge communication challenge inside of our businesses. It's a barbell challenge. So on one side, we have the knowledge workers who are being inundated with emails and notifications from a whole variety of apps, and they're losing a lot of that internal communication in the noise. On the other side of the barbell, we have the deskless and frontline workers who are completely in the dark when it comes to communication. We call these guys the digitally detached, and actually they make up 80% of the global workforce, so 2.7 billion people working in manufacturing, logistics, education, retail, hospitality, healthcare, the list goes on and on and on. And of these group of people, only 5 to 10% of them actually have an IT login at all. So they really don't have an email address or access to a lot of these apps. As a result, they tend to use unofficial work apps like WhatsApp for their communication, and that's obviously problematic for employers. When we speak with leaders of companies with deskless and frontline workers, they often say, unsurprisingly, that the big issue and the big challenge is communication between head office and the front line. And they're really facing some very large challenges indeed. So at the top of the list, we have high employee turnover, we've got challenges around productivity, as well as health and safety and communication. Now, if we look at the medium of communication they're using today, it's overwhelmingly email and word of mouth. We're literally emailing people who don't have an email address, right? And this is a huge problem. What's basically happening is we're emailing line managers in the hope that they pass on that information. We are using company apps, but generally they get logged into around payday. And then obviously there's the good old-fashioned notice board. And this is something that we often see when we go into these really large modern manufacturing plants is 1970s technology. Cork boards on the wall with bits of paper printed out, often in multiple languages. It takes around 4 hours to replace and update. And of course, there's no way of checking if that's even happened. So misinformation is rife. So as you can see, there's a huge opportunity here for digital signage in this workplace. These big luminous boxes that we can remotely update and manage and supercharge team communication. But if we're completely honest, it just hasn't happened yet. And so we wanted to find out a bit more why. We commissioned some research where we spoke with over 1,000 companies, 2,500 decision makers and deskless workers split between the UK and the USA, and the companies had a reasonable amount of size, at least 1,000, 2,000 employees and bigger. The research was conducted by Censuswide, and we did this in partnership with our partners Google Chrome OS. Now, I've seen many talks where we present back research findings, and we just put tons and tons of graphs up here, and it's pretty boring. So I'm going to try and bring this to life for you in a little bit more entertaining way. So I'm using the old Clint Eastwood classic, the good, the bad, and the ugly, and I'm going to group some of these findings together, hopefully to make it more memorable, and so that we can actually start to take some action from the data that we've received. So let's start with the good. Actually, there's some really, really good news that came out of this research. Basically, this stuff works. right? So on employee engagement and well-being, 84% of decision makers said that it had a positive impact on the employee experience. Just behind that, 79% of respondents, so all of those people blended in, said their perception of workplace screens was overall positive. If we dive a bit deeper, looking at productivity and communication, 61% of the deskless workers said that the communication shared on screen made them feel more engaged with the wider business. 59% said that this also helped them be more productive at work. Now, there's still headroom for further growth there, but I think that's already a pretty staggering result to begin with. We've actually seen this ourselves. So a few years ago, we were working with Jet.com, putting in command centers in their logistics units, and they saw doubling and tripling of productivity once people just made more aware of the numbers around them. So we do believe this is actually true. Encouragingly as well, most of these companies are actually trying to measure the impact of this and improve. So most of them are using pulse surveys, verbal feedback, or focus groups, and only 3% were actually not doing anything at all. If we dive a bit deeper into the metrics, this very much supports what I experience on the ground myself. Most of this is validated through employee surveys, which usually happen annually, sometimes every 6 months, employee NPS score. Now, some of the respondents said that they were getting much deeper into the metrics with dwell time, number of views, opportunities to see. In my experience, I haven't seen many really go that deep before, but it's encouraging that at least they think they're doing it. I think they were trying to show off in the survey on that one, if I'm honest. And with the really big question, the big question at the top of the list was, can screens help reduce employee talent turnover? Well, the overwhelming feeling is that, by decision makers at least, this is a positive benefit to the workforce. And here's the big number. 84% believe that digital signage positively impacts retention. That's a massive ROI on these projects. Okay, so things are looking pretty good. Now, unfortunately, let's take a 10 for the worse. This is going to be uncomfortable viewing for most of us in the room, but let's go into the bad. Digital signage still lacks ease and reliability for scaling and management. Most of the, oops, like the font's got a bit funny there. Well, let me explain. Most common technical challenge that was faced in the UK was the inability to sufficiently remotely manage the service. And in the US, they found it difficult to scale and roll out, so adding screens to a multitude of other locations. Now, our partners at Google are probably feeling pretty good about that because most of their roadmap is very much against trying to help with these as well, but there's more that we can do. Unfortunately, 100% of people surveyed faced technical challenges during screen setup and implementation, so we need to do better here. The technical barriers are actually pretty widespread, so it's everything from lack of buy-in, security, remote management, difficulty to scale, maintenance of the system, the UX UI of the software, network connectivity, and system integration issues. Pretty much everything you could ever name, some of them have faced it along the way. As vendors, we need to do better. What came out of this was that there was limited support and consultancy going on at the very beginning of the project in terms of training and implementation services. Now, there's an opportunity for us. If we resource accurately against this and budget for it, we can make more money, but we can also make our customers way more successful in the outset and ultimately have a more successful project. We need to do it in a more timely way, and of course, we need to be reliable. In terms of what goes on the screen, there was unsurprisingly a bit of a disconnect between the two groups. I think this is what we'd expect. So from the decision-making point of view, the emphasis of the content went around compliance and productivity, which kind of aligns with their main challenges. So health and safety information was prioritized, data, KPIs and metrics, and company announcements. But when you actually speak to the people in front of the screen, they're kind of looking for something a little bit more aspirational. They want to see content around learning and development. They want to see reward and recognition for themselves and their peers. And they want to see internal opportunities so that they can stay inside that company, get promoted, and maybe take on managerial things as well. Now, there was some consensus. Everyone agreed that it's important and valuable that company updates are shared via the screens. And so I think we can kind of universally lean in there. Okay, so that's the bad stuff, but I think it's all work in progress, and I feel encouraged that as I walk around, I see us and all of our peers kind of doing better about making digital signage easier to adopt and manage. But some of the data, I have to say, was quite ugly, and I think this was actually touched on in an earlier talk as well. So, cultural barriers and resistance to adopting digital signage, there were many, many, many reasons that came out. And again, every single person faced this. Now, what I've tried to do is group this by theme. So I'm going to take you through the first theme here. The first theme, unsurprisingly, was resistance to change. So we had a lack of generational buy-in at the managerial class, just general resistance to anything new, and a preference for those communication channels which literally don't make sense anymore. On the other side, the people that were responsible for these networks said that they lacked training. There was uncertainty about what type of content should go up on those screens, and there was even concern about where the screen should be placed at all. So to me, all of this points to a need for greater education from our industry to promote best practice. Remember that the people we surveyed were the successful ones. These were the ones who have already implemented digital signage and they've already seen change. So just imagine all of those other companies, which I think is, to be honest, most of them, that didn't even get that far. We need to do more if we are going to get out of this stagnation and grow the industry. So I'm going to tell you a little story. I recently saw a talk by the advertising guru Rory Sutherland, who's been working at Ogilvy for many years. And he was talking about electricity adoption in the household back in the 30s and 40s. So right now, we would never live anywhere that didn't have electricity. It's just got a basic human need. But in the 30s and 40s, the industry actually had to promote the advantages of adopting electricity in the household. So they ran these huge advertising campaigns. Now, it wasn't until they really focused on the influencer in the household, which back then would have been the housewife. This is uncomfortable looking in 2024, but this was one of the adverts that broke through. It had to explicitly point out that by adopting electrically powered tools, she would get more energy back and more time, and this basically caused adoption to happen. There's a version of this that I think we need to do around the medium of communication via screens as an industry. Here's a few screenshots of some of the content that gets put up on internal-facing screens that we see every day. Now, we're not here to name and shame, but basically, the content design is obviously quite poor. If you actually really dive in, this is really the file that probably would have been emailed around. It hasn't been adapted for screen at all. And the screens have been zoned up in such a way which I believe they are skeuomorphically replicating the old notice boards that we've seen, because they don't know a better way. Now, as an industry, if we keep letting this continue, these screens are not going to have their full level of effectiveness. So we must encourage better design practices and standards for communication via screen. Now, here's where I think the opportunity is huge for AI. The information that they want to put up there already exists in these files, but it's not in a screen-friendly format, and they don't have the design talent or resource to actually get that up onto screen. I believe AI can be transformative in taking this content, adding, say, some basic communication framework around it, and then pushing that up to screen in a much more effective way. So we have this technology wave which is coming that I think is going to do us a huge favor in this arena. As Alan Kay famously said, and I'm quoting something my co-founder Luke always uses, he's the father of personal computers, and he said the best way to predict the future is to create it. And I feel extremely excited about that future if we can get this right, and we can all work together as an industry, not just as individual contributors and companies. So, in conclusion, the research came up with 5 key critical improvements that we need to make. We need to better educate. We need more vendor engagement. We need to share knowledge on the best practices of communication via screen. And we need to continue for the technology to improve to support adoption and support of these screen networks for our customers. I think the future is extremely bright for screens that communicate if, as an industry, we do more to evangelize screens as a truly powerful communication medium. The whole report has plenty more information, so I'm going to leave the QR code up there. There's a bit.ly link, bit.ly/digital signage report. I would encourage you to download that, digest it, think about it, and reflect. And thank you very much for listening.
Thanks a lot, Mark. Are there any questions?
Can't actually see.
Yeah, it's hard to see. No questions?
Oh, I think there's one at the back.
Yeah. Hi, Mark.
Oh, hey, Victor. How you doing?
Hey, how are you doing? So, what you mentioned about zonings and overloading screens rings very true. And I think the education part is critical there. But how do you break the cable news worldview of how a screen should look to these customers? Because I feel like that's where they draw their inspiration with tickers, 15 zones, and overloading the screen. That conversation has always been challenging when you come to a customer that has this worldview, because changing that mindset is extremely difficult.
Yeah, absolutely. So I suppose where I look back for inspiration here is I look back through my own career. So when I was a teenager in the 90s, I became interested in the web and web development. The early websites that I was building for like small businesses, my mum and dad's company, things like that, you know, these websites were pretty terrible. We didn't really know what to put on them. So we put like Java applets that put the time, we put a ticker of BBC News. We didn't really know what else to do. So we sort of filled the space with information that we had. And we certainly didn't track analytics. Really, we were just putting brochureware up online as these websites. Now, if you kind of move forward a few years, a design language, an ecosystem of how to do kind of good web design, or at least basically well-designed websites, kind of evolved through navigation and principles. And as we got into mobile and we got into responsive design, we all kind of settled upon what we think is a basic best practice standard. And I think that was probably driven by the fact that we had some early pioneering like websites that were basically sort of marching ahead and showing that if you do it the right way, you get way better results. So I kind of think maybe just research like the one we've done. I mean, if you actually try and look for research in this category, there really is very, very little. I think this is one of the first reports I've seen focused on this side of signage, not so much on obviously the commercial stuff. And again, if you look at the commercial stuff, the content quality is pretty good. Like I don't generally see retail environments where the content's anywhere near as bad as what we're seeing here. So I kind of feel that there is a lot of hope if we continue to show best practice, to celebrate it, and then when we have done that right, to actually analyze the ROI and publish it. Because ultimately, what do these people want to do? They don't really want to communicate poorly. They want to actually engage these people. They want to ultimately make more money by reducing staff turnover and increasing productivity. If we double down on proving that screens is a medium that can nudge that forward, then why wouldn't they adopt best practice? I think at the moment we're in the opinion game. And when you're in the opinion game, the customer wins, and that's the problem. So I think that the future, as I said, is very bright, but I think if we don't take this seriously, then it's going to be a long, slow ride. Which is a real shame, because otherwise, you know, we're still going to be using 1970s tech for the foreseeable future.
Any other questions?
If you can't see it all, there may be. Okay, I think so.
Yeah, I don't think so. So yeah, thank you very much, Mark. The topic is, as you said, probably much less sexy than the shiny retail front-end side of things, but it's so important. And it's we've seen it for many, especially large companies, doubling down on their employee communication, because that's a scarce resource for them. I mean, having a communication channel to their employees, to their staff, it's so important.
It's definitely, yeah, I agree. It doesn't have the same kind of, you know, glitz and glamour of the big screens and things like that, but it's very worthy work, because when you go into these environments and you just see how poorly this is being done, and just think that, you know, as a technology developer, there is something small that we can do to improve those environments. I find that really inspiring, to be honest. And that's what gets me up out of bed in the morning and makes me think, right, let's go and change the world just a little bit and just make it a little bit better for 80% of the people who are working.
Very good. Thanks a lot. And I think you'll be around for questions, so
absolutely.
Feel free.